You
act surprised.
yeah, it'd be fine, because you're the first thing up.
I can also.
These things pretty succinct.
We're ready to go. Good evening. I will call to order Wilsonville City Council meeting for August 19, 2019 at 7:02 p.m. and request a roll call, please.
Councillor West?
Here.
Council President Ackerval?
Here.
Councillor Lehan?
Here.
Mayor Knapp?
Here. Would the audience please rise and join us in a pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, we have a major item of business tonight on interviews with our council candidates for appointment, but we have a few other things that we want to do also, though we'll try to maybe streamline those. First of all, we have communications, and I would like to invite Representative Courtney Neron to come forward and give us a little perspective on her first session in the House.
Thank you so much. And I will state that I'm Courtney Neron, and I'm a Wilsonville resident. Let's see. I have a PowerPoint here for everybody. Can I get it up to the, can I go to that?
It'll be right there.
There we go.
So just wanted to give everybody a legislative update on our 2019 legislative session. It was our long session, meeting from January to the end of June, the very last day of June. And so I'll just talk a little bit about legislation that impacted all of Oregon, and also kind of focus in on some of the things that Wilsonville specifically is quite interested in. And then also just wrap up with how to connect with me as your state representative. Starting off, put education first as a teacher. The Student Success Act was quite exciting for pre-K through 12th graders in Oregon. We set aside dedicated investments, and they're sustainable investments that we hope will improve the student outcomes. That's their focus. It will require ongoing accountability for school districts and also close opportunity gaps for the historically underserved population of students in Oregon. Some of the specifics are that this legislation will increase mental and behavioral health supports, which we've heard across the state is a huge need. We are focusing on increasing meals offered to students in need, and it will also allow us to fully fund Measure 97, so providing that career and technical education that voters voted that they support. We are hoping that school districts will also increase learning time where possible and add in staff so that we are better able to address the needs of students. This legislation also makes unprecedented investments in early childhood education, which we know is invaluable and has a great return. In terms of higher education, we were able to fund at record levels the community colleges and public universities in the state. And obviously beneficiaries are going to be our local businesses and economies and our communities in general. Personally, I believe we need to invest in cradle to career, so I'm also part of an ongoing conversation among legislators to find and stabilize the higher education budgets. And that will be an ongoing conversation in the future. We do have a housing crisis in Oregon, so two of the things that we did in the legislature this year that are, will hopefully have positive impacts on that crisis are House Bill 2001 that addresses the lack of middle housing in Oregon. It responds to the deficit in the supply by encouraging and, well, essentially allowing housing such as duplexes, cottage clusters, townhomes, in areas where that was previously excluded. So it removes the exclusionary housing zoning. And then Senate Bill 608 stabilized rent, or aims to stabilize rent spikes. We've had instances of extreme rent spikes that really impact some of our most vulnerable. And it also prevents and protects against no-cause evictions, so there has to be reason for an eviction. In terms of healthcare and the rising cost of healthcare and access to it, we addressed that with a few different ways. One of the pieces of legislation is requiring a 60-day notice of prescription drug price increases. And another piece of legislation ensures that our nonprofit hospitals are in fact providing adequate charity care to be considered nonprofit hospitals. We stabilized Oregon's Medicaid system, and that system supports 400,000 children, seniors, and individuals with disabilities. So essential that we make sure that they have access to affordable health care. I took special interest in this drug take-back program. Really excited that now drug manufacturers will be required to help fund this program that will essentially provide an avenue for returning unwanted medicines. So we'll reduce drugs that are flushed down the toilet, medicines that are become part of our waste stream and in our water. And also it will help prevent them from falling into the wrong hands, which we know we have addiction throughout the state. So we did refer to voters an increase in tobacco taxes, and it would also institute a tax on vaping products, which we don't currently have, and that will help fund the Oregon Health Plan. So a cycle there that we are interested in seeing what voters will, if they will approve that. Really proud and thankful for the paid family medical leave insurance program that our state now will be working toward. We had bipartisan support in this program. It's a shared employee-employer payroll tax of less than 1%. And what it will do is essentially become a safety net for anybody that needs to take time off to care for a loved one. It has been written about in many different places. It is touted as one of the strongest in the nation. It does include domestic violence safe leave and encompasses different business models as well as family structures. So very inclusive. It reflects that low-wage workers often live paycheck to paycheck by setting the low-wage worker rate at 100% of the paycheck replacement when they have to care for a loved one. It will take effect in 2023 because we do need time to get the structure and revenue in place to make this possible. We are leading the way in this particular category, in this particular topic. And we join about 8 other states in offering this kind of a program. And just wanted to remind that the US is one of the only countries without a paid family medical leave program. So this is exciting that we're essentially showing what's possible in the United States. We did address the justice system in many different ways. We, in terms of domestic abuse, we, House Bill 2013 ensured that domestic abusers and stalkers won't have access to firearms. So it closed a loophole that was from previous legislation where there wasn't an actual avenue of returning the firearms once somebody was determined to be an abuser or stalker. In terms of juvenile justice reform, House Bill 1008 allows for teens to have a higher likelihood of rehabilitation, and that also had bipartisan support to allow a second look. We strengthened hate crimes in Oregon, addressing harassment and bias. And the Equal Access to Roads Act will allow an Oregon resident with identification to access a license, insurance, and drive legally. It will reduce incidences of hit and run accidents. It's been shown to do that in other states. And ideally will allow residents to participate in our economy and support family activities. Oh goodness, how do I get to the next one?
Toggle arrow.
Help me out.
Probably Zoe knows how to do it. Don't right click.
Oh, that's the thing. I didn't see where the arrow went. Thank you. All right, thanks. In terms of the environment, we do have the Environmental Protection Act to celebrate, which will maintain our strong tradition of environmental standards in Oregon, and that will maintain that statewide, regardless of what the federal government does. That now Oregon has some strong environmental standards that will stand. We instituted oil train safety protocols, so now we have some standards that were not previously in place for the oil trains that come down the gorge and now throughout the state. We're seeing more and more of those. We also passed clean diesel legislation that will ideally help use the VW settlement money to help Portland area engines transition to cleaner burning diesel. So we continued a moratorium on fracking and banned offshore drilling. Unfortunately, we were unable to pass the Clean Energy Jobs bill for lack of votes. And we had a second walkout that put the bill at risk and many budgets as well. So we are, though, poised to be a national leader if we are able to continue this conversation because of how comprehensive this particular piece of legislation is. We're poised to be a national leader on carbon reduction legislation, and we are hoping that that Oregonians see that it does consider rural and urban needs. Focusing closer to home on Clackamas County, I was part of the Clackamas County Caucus of Legislators, a bipartisan, bicameral group, and one of the things that we advocated for strongly was the courthouse that Clackamas County so desperately needs. The old courthouse is perched in Oregon City right on a cliff above the Willamette River, and that cliff is an unstable cliff, and for many reasons, that particular building does need upgrades. It's inadequate in the space, in the way that people on trial are passing by the people that are that they are going to meet in the courtroom. So they want to make sure that we have a modernized courthouse, and it was the one of the number one legislative priorities of Clackamas County. So we're celebrating that we will have a new Clackamas County courthouse on the Red Soils campus, and it will be state-of-the-art and seismically sound, which brings us to a focus on Wilsonville. We can celebrate that we do have the Boone Bridge project. It will be taken to the next phase in terms of a cost to complete step. ODOT has been directed to conduct the cost to complete phase of the project, and I am continuing to advocate for that money. There was not a set dollar amount, so making sure that we are continuing to advocate for that particular project to get the appropriate support that it needs to be completed. But they have been directed to do that, so the work in many ways is all but complete at this point. The study will be enough to do the final legislative ask for an allocation to do the lane improvements and the seismic upgrades to southbound I-5 at the Boone Bridge. So this is very exciting because we know the bottleneck that the Boone Bridge can pose. The Willamette River Safety and Protection item there has to do with House Bills 2351 and 2352. There are now new rules for our stretch of the Willamette River, known as the Newburgh Pool. It's the deepest and narrowest area of the river, and we have a lot of wake surfing that goes along this part of our river. So now there are going to be zones and permits that boaters who want to do wake surfing need to acquire and participate in those zones. The goal is to protect docks and property, as well as the shoreline that is impacted. The stability of the shoreline is impacted by the size of the waves as they head straight to the walls of the Newburgh Pool section of the river. So, and there are, I was just researching this, there are a few websites that show the new rules. If boaters are interested, they can look up the wake surfing rules to be informed about their wake surfing sport. Coffee Creek Correctional Facility is in our district, and they are especially excited about the House Bill 2631 pilot program that will provide legal services to assist women who are incarcerated. There are a lot of people in Coffee Creek right now really celebrating that pilot program will be coming to them. And we are still working to fund the Family Preservation Project that does connect parents who are incarcerated with their children and helps those children to thrive and keep that family bond during an incarceration. So working to fund that. I want to compliment the city on the Kinder Morgan work. It was an interesting conversation, and we are looking forward to the automatic shutoff valve this September. I, along with you guys, believe that safety and oversight need to be our high priorities, and want to let you guys know that I'm going to continue to work with you however you need to make sure that we do have that safety and oversight that we find satisfying for the pipeline under our city. If you want to connect with me, I am having constituent coffees each month. We just had the Wilsonville constituent coffee, and upcoming is Hillsborough and Sherwood constituent coffees. We have the Reedville Cafe on September 4th from 10 to noon, and the Symposium Cafe in Sherwood on October 8th from 10 to noon. And Wilsonville Town Hall, we've been doing town halls in each of the communities of the district. So Wilsonville Town Hall will be this September 19th from 6 to 7 p.m. at the public library here in Wilsonville in the Oak Room. And I also have an email address, rep.courtneyneron@oregonlegislature.gov is my email address, and I'd love to hear from people that have any interest in a particular topic or want to meet with me at a time that's not one of those three that's shown. I'm happy to meet with constituents to talk about the things on their minds. And if phone is a preference, the Salem office is 503-986-1426. So I want to hear from people when they have concerns and ideas and want to get to know their legislator. So I would be happy to answer any questions. I think that's the last slide I made. There we go. That you guys have. It looks like I'm right at 7:20. So.
Well, thank you so much for all that information, Council. Questions for Representative Neron? Anything you'd like to ask? There's my Councilor West.
I had the distinct pleasure to see you a lot in Salem, and often not always agreeing on every issue clearly, but the working relationship we had was incredibly collaborative, and I feel like that you actually represented specifically in many ways that are targeted to Wilsonville really well, and that I think the rest of the council, I don't know, we haven't initially said, but would agree that you were really instrumental, especially with the Boone Bridge stuff, and I really appreciate you really listening and partnering and fighting for me with some of our most vulnerable population. You're one of my biggest fans and assets in Salem with foster kids, Absolutely. So I really appreciate that. And I look forward to working with you in the future.
Oh, thank you. Likewise. It's been a pleasure to work with you.
Anybody else? I would like to ask you, Representative, how it felt to be your first year as a legislator with all that was going on.
I was surprised how many people kept asking if I was having fun. It was almost a daily question for a while. And my response to that is, it wasn't necessarily something that I went into because of a fun concept, but it was such meaningful work and getting to know such a wide variety of topics. I felt like I was learning every day and just really getting to know the district in depth and the many conversations that are being had out there. It's been fascinating work. It's been so meaningful. And I felt like we did so much good this session that it was just an incredible experience to be a part of it.
Well, that's great. And I certainly would second Councilor West, because every contact I had with you in your office was very gratifying, and you and your people were always interested in what was going on and why and what the context was. That's the kind of legislator that I think we benefit from mostly. So congratulations on your first year. We look forward to next year also.
I do too. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Definitely.
That brings us to our citizens input and community announcements section, which is a time for people to address the council on anything that's not on the agenda, also to address council on things that are on the agenda but not scheduled for public hearing. Staff and council will make every effort to respond to questions raised during this session, either before the meeting ends or as soon as possible thereafter. We do ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. I have not received any speaker cards, perhaps in deference to our primary item of business tonight, that we're going to streamline this a little bit. Is there anyone that would like to speak at this time? I'm seeing none, so I think we will move on. I normally give a robust mayor's business report, but I'm going to kind of streamline that also. There's been some meeting cancellations in August with a lot of people doing summer things before the summer's over, and things are ramping back up. The Metro Transportation Task Force meets Wednesday night this week. I'm going to try to get down there. Councilors, are there any urgent items that you want to speak on, or should we move on forward?
I have nothing.
Well,
Let's move.
just a couple of announcement things.
Okay.
The last Movies in the Park is this week. So that has been a popular thing at the River Shelter, 9 o'clock on, must be Friday, the 23rd. And then I want to remind people about the history pubs at McMinimans in the old church. The one next week on the 27th, it's always the last Tuesday of the month. The next one on the 27th is on pinball racketeers. So it's about racketeering in the Portland metro area during the 1950s. This is not like that far ago that pinball was illegal. That's what the little pinball things, illegal. Anyway, it should be a very interesting presentation. And then the September one is September 24th, and that will be myself and Mr. Leo, who will be doing a program on myths and milestones. So we're going to be taking a deeper dive into some of the assumptions about Wilsonville history. So it'll be Wilsonville history, myths and milestones in September. That's it.
Okay, thanks very much. Anybody else? All right, why don't we jump on ahead and ask for our consent agenda, please?
Consent agenda, resolution number 2769, a resolution of the City of Wilsonville acting in its capacity as the local contract review board, authorizing the city manager to execute a construction contract with Statler Supply and Construction for construction of the Gessel Shaft well facility rehab and upgrades project.
Close enough. And then minutes.
And secondly, the minutes of December 3, 2018, December 17, 2018, January 7, 2019, March 4, 2019, and March 18, 2019 council meeting.
Thank you. Is there a motion on consent?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, passes 4-0. Bringing us to our primary item of business, which is going to be interviews with the different council candidates. I'm going to invite the candidates that are here in the room to segregate themselves out of the room until their time comes, and we will be doing individual interviews with the candidates in a pre-established order that was kind of, I don't know how it was established actually, but
I didn't have a.
By me in the doorway talking to Kim.
okay. Who was available when, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. So we will have interviews with Olive Gallagher, Katie Ham, Bill Amadon, Joanne Linville, and John Badillo in that order. And just for the public's information, we are not going to deliberate or make any decisions tonight or even have any dialogue about that. Tonight's agenda is strictly the interviews with the candidates themselves. We're set for 30 minutes with each candidate. We have 6 questions that we are going to be asking each candidate. It's the same 6 questions, which is part of why we asked people to isolate themselves. We thought that format would give us the clearest comparative picture dealing with people. And each of our counselors is going to ask some questions, and I'm fighting a cold tonight, so I'm not going to do very much of the questioning, and the council will do most of that. Is there any question the council needs to have answered before we jump in? We're ready to go?
I guess a quick question. How will we handle if we need to throw in follow-up? Are you calling us like we would in a discussion, or if we have like maybe a quick follow-up with something or
Well,
something else to jump in?
if you feel the urge for a quick follow-up on a given question, keep in mind that with 6 questions, we have like 5 minutes each, and we don't want to run heavily over on one question, which will then inhibit some of the other questions. So partly it's a question of whether there's really time to do a follow-up and try to keep it focused on the topic of the question itself if we can.
And then we talked about this offline, Kristen, today is maybe, Barbara, you can help us make sure moving after the meeting as we potentially discuss what's happening before the next vote, making sure that we're all on the same page with how to speak with one another offline. Am I correct? We talked about that a little bit.
Barbara?
Just a recap.
Okay, well, you have to be careful because of if you're speaking to each other in any kind of a phone tree, that's a public meeting. So while you can talk, Charlotte could talk with Ben, but then Ben doesn't go and relay what Charlotte said to Kristen. So you have to just be careful that if you have somebody you want to talk to, you can talk to one counselor, but you should probably isolate it to that.
And you don't want to deliberate toward any decision
Yes.
outside of the public process.
Yeah, so you can ask each other questions, but, you don't want to say, well, I'm going to vote for so-and-so. Will you support that same person? So you're sort of lining up votes offline. That's the one main thing you don't want to do.
Yeah. So should try to keep them factual more than
Yes.
opinion.
Right, no lobbying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I hope you'll support this person because I thought their answer to this question was great. You can ask questions, what did you think,
How
or,
did you feel?
Or I heard this, did you hear the same thing?
Yeah.
All that stuff is acceptable.
yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, there should be no attempts to persuade each other to vote for one person or another.
Okay.
That's the main thing.
Okay. Good?
Yes.
Our first candidate is Olive Gallagher. They send him to the far end of the hall.
She's waiting for her walk-up song. Witness.
Thank you. Let me get a tissue. The air conditioning has hit me already.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark.
Good evening. So we're interviewing 5 candidates tonight. Each candidate gets a half an hour. We have 6 questions, so essentially about 5 minutes per question to get to half an hour, and we want to try to constrain within that, but feel free to answer as you think.
Does a duck come down and hit me if I'm over the 5 minutes?
There is a green, yellow, red light there, so when it gets to 2 minutes, it'll turn the yellow on, or
Oh, dear. All right.
2 minutes left out of the 30?
It's not to stop you, it's just to tell you how much time you're using.
It's fine.
So,
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's right there
there's a
as
clock
well.
there. Ah, right here, right here.
okay. And the council is all going to ask some questions, and I'm kind of fighting a cold, so I'm not going to talk very much. So we're going to let them ask some questions and let you talk then. So Councilor Ackervald, thought you might lead off.
First of all, welcome and thank you for being here this evening, and thank you for your interest in serving in this role.
My pleasure.
For the first question, I wonder if you could describe a plan, a project, or an initiative that the city and council is currently working on. Give us a little detail, and then explain what you would bring to that work.
Well, there's a tree planting project that I'm aware of. And I had the pleasure of hearing about it because I sat on the Enhancement Commission. And I know there's a tree dying on my street, and it was really quite wonderful the other day for me to send an email off to Delora and say, you know, there's a tree that's been dead for 2 years on our island. And she said, yes, and it's earmarked for replacement in the fall. And I thought that was really terrific. That is not a response that I would have expected to get, and certainly not one I would have gotten if I was living somewhere else. So I think it says a lot about this town and the fact that it is very committed to the green space, to its foliage, and to the health of the community. And I think that the tree project, I know that was one of the projects that we ended up agreeing to fund that really caught my eye because I see enormous potential, not only for the health of the city, but also as a learning project for our young ones, especially now with the crisis around climate change. So that's something that I would love to help out and support. And I think there are enormous marketing opportunities that when I heard about the project initially in the meeting, hadn't really even been thought of. And I think that there's opportunity there.
Thank you.
Mr. West has our next question.
I'd also like to welcome you. Thank you for coming today. My question is for you is, please tell us about a time when you had to collaborate with someone you strongly disagreed with, and what was the end result of that collaboration?
I was appointed the executive director of a statewide nonprofit by the governor in California several decades ago. The purpose of the nonprofit was to create, it was called CalQED, and the purpose was to create a sort of a Malcolm Baldrige type of quality award system for the state rather than on the national level. And I ended up inheriting both a board of directors of wonderful corporate leaders throughout the state, which was great. And I also ended up with another board that I never quite understood why they were there. And everything that I proposed to do for educational programs, the corporate board was totally in support of. And this other board, this advisory board, nixed everything I brought to the table. And it was a very contentious, it was confusing to me because one would hope when you're making an initial effort to launch a statewide organization that anyone that would decide to come on board and be on board would support the basic tenets that had been established when the nonprofit was written. And yet everything that we were trying to accomplish, this advisory board seemed to be against. And it was a real power struggle. It was difficult, it was contentious, it was at times very unpleasant. And frankly, after 9 months of trying to get this baby off the ground, I finally announced at a board meeting that I was resigning because I felt that there was no will to fly the plane and I didn't want it to crash and burn. And so I left. But it taught me a very interesting lesson about make sure before you come on board something that you're not walking into an impossible situation that you really have no control over. And it happens.
Thank you.
Councilor Lehan.
Okay. I'm just reading these questions. This one is, what would you advocate to do about traffic? And it says here that the council and staff are not already doing, but I'm happy to hear anything you would whether we're doing it or not. What's your opinion about, ideas about traffic?
Could you be more specific? Because I think of Wilsonville, one of the reasons I love living here is because it's so incredibly manageable on the streets. Now, if you ask me about I-5, that's a whole other story. And it seems to me, from what I've experienced so far here, is that whatever traffic problems we usually end up having around drive times is caused by the congestion of trying to get into or off of the I-5. I haven't personally yet experienced impossible traffic here. Occasionally on Parkway, coming south around 4 o'clock in the afternoon when Mentor Graphics and that area empties out, there can be a fairly long line going south to the light at Bokeman, because I live right around there. But to me, I think it's, right now, I have to compliment the city. I think it's really being managed well. I cannot tell you how happy I am going to be when I leave here and I get in my little car to drive up the street and go home. I probably won't see a car. And I love that. So let's keep it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor West.
I would agree that I-5 is an issue that we can't control, but all of those other side streets are things we can control. Is there anything that you can point to within city planning that potentially exacerbates the traffic issues within our city?
I have observed frequently on city streets and ingress streets, for instance, where I live on Greenway and I have to take Ash Meadows out and then I have to get onto Parkway. I've seen really bad driving, not observing stop signs, simply bad, including a truck going by a school bus that was stopped letting children on 7:30 in the morning and just going around the left and going onto Parkway. So I see a lot of bad driving habits, and I'm also a walking example of being rear-ended twice since I moved to Portland. So thank you for that, Portland drivers. I'm not an expert in traffic patterns, so I would not speak to something that I'm not an expert at. But I certainly have observed reckless driving. And I have reported it. I have gone online, and I think that's a terrific system of being able to go on and enter into a complaint and then have it immediately followed up to the point where I will get 22. We followed up, we followed up, we followed up. But that's great. I'd rather have overkill on response than no response at all. But again, there are accidents waiting to happen. And I don't know what the answer is, but you can't have a policeman at every corner. So maybe some courses, maybe some bringing it to the public's attention that they've been observed, that there are infractions going on, and then it's up to us as citizens to be better at our driving so accidents don't occur. I mean, I think at some point there does have to be accountability of the people that live here. You can't police everything. And I know in the time that I've lived here, I haven't observed or seen or heard anything about, you know, either a town hall or a discussion around, we've got some issues and we want to make sure before we have a bad accident that everyone pulls their weight. Something we could do.
Thank you for answering my question.
Did you want to ask your scripted?
Oh, I'm next again. So my next question is, what philosophical approach has Wilsonville followed with regard to growth and development, and what will you advocate to continue or to change?
Oh, well, that's one I think that was touched briefly when I interviewed the first time around. And I said that I don't know enough yet to speak informatively about specifics that I would suggest. I think that's something that I would have to spend time studying and listening to all of you. I will tell you that I'm here tonight because I'm doing something that I never would have thought I would do. I'm used to giving speeches, but not in this kind of forum. I just love this town. I have fallen in love with this town. And I think I have fallen in love with it since I come from a small town, because I recognize in it that it's doing something right. a lot of things right. And having gone through Citizens Academy, I now know that it was just a gut feeling that I had before I went through it. And now that I've learned a little bit more and gotten to know Brian and Zoe and the mayor and a few other people, I realize, yes, you are doing a lot of things right. So I think philosophically, since I'm an ethicist, and I'm always looking at the common good and common ground and responsible use of power and decisions that are made for the people, rather than for an interest group or a particular person that may benefit from it. I think I'm always going to be looking at our culture and seeing if we're really making decisions that continue to provide for people who live here a quality of life that frankly is disappearing around us and is really hard to find. And I've lived in 32 communities in my adult life. I've moved that many times. So I think I know a little bit about what isn't working. And so I think when I fell upon a place where it is working, I recognized it.
Okay.
Councilor
Okay.
Lehan.
Well, with that being the case, perhaps you could talk a little bit about your feelings on environmental stewardship and farmland preservation, land use planning, those sorts of things as it affects our city, and where you think these issues come into play for Wilsonville.
Well, how much time have you got for that?
Well, just something.
I've been saving my minutes.
You have plenty.
It's the environment to me, and again, I don't think you can separate environment from quality of life, at least not in my terms, in terms of the things that I value in my life, and someone may differ on that. That may not be important to them. But I think to be able to see the stars at night and to hear crickets in the evening, despite the roar of I-5, or hear birdsong in the morning, I think to see old growth being protected even when there's development going on like there is on Boakman right now near Stafford, to be able to drive less than 5 minutes and find yourself in farmland and in countryside. I don't know a lot of people realize that all you have to do is drive 5 to 10 minutes in any direction outside of Portland and you're in farmland. And I love that about this area of the country because I grew up in a small town and farmland was very important. I love the fact that I can drive on Oakman over and cross that bridge that I learned about during Citizens Academy. I'm sorry. Where the bridge was constructed with great thought to making sure that creatures could cross the street safely and remain in their environment without imposing upon them. That kind of thoughtfulness and planning to me is fantastic. And there should be more places. We really can be and should be known as a model for many cities around the country. So it's very, very important. And we're having some serious problems in the world right now because we're not paying enough attention to our environment. So whatever we can do here, I'm for it.
Thank you.
Well, you're using your time very judiciously here, so we've got lots of time. There's only one more question, which I will ask you, and then give you a chance to say anything else.
As a professional public speaker, I know how to use time, and I also know that you always leave an audience wanting more. So I'm happy to be done soon.
So why are you the person that this council should appoint?
Because I'm different. As I said, I'm an ethicist. I have been writing and lecturing and working with private clients for 35 years on the responsible use of power, making choices based on values, and being accountable for the impact you have on the world around you, which is what I call responsible power, is knowing that you have power and using it responsibly and taking responsibility for the impact on the people in the world around you. And it's in my bones. It's my philosophy. It's been my life's work. And I've seen in practice that when people simplify their lives, are clear about their values and honor them, the world is a better place. And a lot of the problems that we have today between addiction and stress and corruption and all the other things is because people have frankly just They're so busy being, chasing some elusive dream that they're never going to really own. And they've lost their way, and they're very unhappy, they're unhealthy, and it doesn't have to be that way. And I think if someone chooses to come to a place like this, they've come and chosen this place for a number of values, but we're providing them with a quality of life that maybe will empower them and inspire them to teach their children about more important things. And we have that opportunity to continue to set an example, and I think that's outrageously wonderful.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anything council would like to ask?
Thank you for the honor of meeting with you.
Well, thank you for your interest and taking the time and trouble. It's
My
not always
pleasure.
easy. I appreciate that and appreciate the work you're doing in the community already.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks very much.
Good night.
Thank you.
She's different. She's my favorite.
People are going to be surprised that it wasn't 30 minutes before they were asked to come in.
I was like, I have to find a good follow-up because we have so much time.
Say, while we're waiting, the issue came up about Gesellschaft, because that's the name of a well, the Gesellschaft well. And we presumed it, I would presumed it wrongly to be the name of someone, some German guy. But indeed, it was invented by a German socialist. And it just means a community, social organization.
Gesellschaft means a community organization.
Yeah,
Is a German word for?
All right.
German word, yes, but yeah, it's a community and society objective or something like that. It's a community.
Well, not exactly the discussion that our candidate Katie Ham probably was expecting.
That's okay. I just did my 23andMe and I have German ancestry, so I feel
good.
right at home in the.
You already knew what Gesellschaft was, huh?
So our format is up to 30 minutes. Our last candidate did not take that long, but you're certainly welcome to take up to 30 minutes. We have 6 pre-scripted questions, so that would translate out to about 5 minutes apiece if you use the full time. If there's extra time, we'll give the council opportunity to ask some additional questions or give you some time to expound on something you would like to do also. And everybody is going to ask a question or two. So we would start with Councilor Ackerball.
Hi, and thank you for being here this evening, and thank you for having interest in serving in this position.
Thank you so much for having me.
My first question is if you could describe a plan, project, or an initiative that the city and council is currently working on, give us some detail, and then explain what you would bring to that work.
One project that really excites and energizes me is the revitalization of the town center. I have lived in Wilsonville, well, right outside of Wilsonville my whole life, essentially, except for a couple of years of my childhood and during college. And I remember when Wilsonville was just Sunshine Pizza and Dairy Queen, and it has grown so much. And I think that we have a pretty amazing opportunity to really make our town center even better than it is, something that's accessible to all our citizens, something that is a real destination, something that's attracting businesses and families of all sorts, families with young kids, older people, single people, large families. So I would be really interested in working on that project and seeing that come to fruition.
Councilor West.
My question is, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Please tell us about a time when you had to collaborate with someone you strongly disagreed with, and what was the result of your collaboration?
Well, a lot of examples come to mind, but in my professional capacity, I do mortgage lending for Umpqua Bank, which is the largest local regional bank in Oregon. So I collaborate on a daily basis. I'm kind of the conduit between all the people in the home buying process, collaboration between my clients, real estate agents, underwriters, escrow officers, and there are a lot of big personalities oftentimes in these transactions. And my role really is to kind of hold it all together, to effectively communicate even when perhaps tensions are high and personalities aren't necessarily jiving. I do think that that a strong leader can really direct projects like that and get everyone working towards a common goal when it's very clear what our goal is, what we're working towards, and not losing sight of that. And I think that's why I've been effective in my job professionally, because I have that ability to bring people together in all sorts of different personality types and leadership styles. Just recognizing who the key players are, recognizing what their strengths are, and keeping people on track for a common goal.
I will say this, I called, because I didn't know you very well, so I called some of your references that you put.
Oh, yeah.
And they did attest that she is good at that professionally, and her professional reputation is above board. And they spoke very highly of how when they know that I was in the mortgage lending business for a while, once upon a time, and had a staff and a branch. And they told me that when that deal is going to stay together, when they see you come through on who the lender is, they have a lot of confidence in you. So I think you've shown some of that, and that's been your reputation.
Thank you. That means a lot. Thanks.
Okay. My question is, give us some ideas of things that you would do about traffic in Wilsonville, either of things that the council and staff are currently doing or brand new ideas you've thought of on your own.
Yeah. I mean, traffic, it's something that I think we're going to have to deal with not only on a city level, but really, I mean, our entire country. Not to make too big of a deal out of it, but it's something that is just such an impact on people's quality of life. How much time they're sitting in their car. I mean, there are just so many reverberations in terms of like how that's affecting families and people's professional lives. And so I definitely appreciate the gravity of the problem. The more people that we have living in Wilsonville, in our wonderful city, I mean, it just means more cars on the road, more people trying to get from here to there. So a few kind of things off the top of my head. Attracting businesses, dynamic businesses to Wilsonville, I think is key. And what I mean by dynamic businesses are businesses that understand the value of not necessarily confining people to that 9-to-5 work schedule, using technology to our advantage so that people don't have to be all on the road at the exact same time. One of the things that I feel lucky and fortunate about in my job is that I can really work from anywhere. I have an office in Lake Oswego, but then I can come back to Wilsonville to either sit at the branch or, even work from Starbucks to be here in my local community and stay off the roads at 5 o'clock. It helps my family because I'm able to be closer to pick up my daughters and those sorts of things. I think public transportation, making sure that's strong in our city, the infrastructure for that is strong, and making sure that all our citizens have access and awareness to public transportation to keep more cars off the road. And also things like bike lanes and making things pedestrian friendly. And can we set up a city where it makes sense to take a walk or take a bike ride with your family versus getting in the car and, driving all over the place? So I think it's kind of a combination. It's not, I mean, there's obviously the kind of very practical matters of we need to have the traffic lights working and turn lanes and those sorts of things in a sense that the engineering of it makes sense, but also kind of creative ideas just to reduce or at least spread out the traffic as much as we possibly can.
Thank you.
Mr. West.
What philosophical approach has Wilsonville followed with regard to growth and development, and what would you advocate to continue or change with regarding to this philosophy or this approach?
So one of the things that I love about this city is we're a suburb of a major metropolitan area, but we also have some pretty unique diversity, socioeconomic diversity, cultural diversity. And I think the philosophy of the city has really contributed a lot to that. So I would continue to advocate for that growth of a well-rounded community in terms of culture and appreciation of all our citizens being active and involved who come from different family structures and different backgrounds. Can you repeat the second part of your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just repeat it, and then if you want me, we can tell me what philosophical approach has Wilsonville followed with regard to growth and development, and what would you advocate to continue, or what would you say, hey, we could change that?
Yeah, so thank you for that. The other thing that I admire about the philosophy is just bringing together quality of life for our citizens, as well as sustainable, responsible business growth. We want to be a place where people want to come do business and where businesses want to employ people so that we can support the quality of life for the people who live here. I remember a while ago, probably, well, I don't want to get the years wrong, but for a long time it seemed like Wilsonville kind of emptied out during the day as the citizens left to go work elsewhere, and then people came to work and then went back to their homes. And I think there's been a pretty dynamic shift in that, where now people are really calling Wilsonville home. They live here, they work here, they shop here, and they don't need to or want to really leave every day. Everything's here where they need, and I think that's a pretty wonderful philosophy. Our schools are strong, and our education system is definitely to be admired. We have very involved citizens in different capacities, and I think that reflects really strongly on our city.
Okay. Then I have a second question. If you could talk a little bit about your feelings on environmental stewardship and farmland protection and generally land use planning as they affect our city.
Yeah. Environmentalism is something that is near and dear to my heart. My father passed away about 3.5 years ago, and he was the ultimate tree lover. And it's just something that is in my blood, that we need to protect this earth that we live on. We don't have another one. We don't have a backup plan. Wilsonville has that combination of farmland and more urban type land, and it's important to be very strategic about how we develop land and making sure that land is, once we develop land, it can't be taken back. And we have some really pretty amazing farmland within the jurisdiction of Wilsonville, that I think is a real treasure. In terms of environmentalism in general, I think the time is here where we as leaders need to be making decisions based on the science that's available to us to show that our actions on city, county, state levels are having a real impact on the climate. And there's, new studies coming out every day about the importance of even like micro actions within communities that are going to make a big change and be important for that climate change discussion. And I think that there can be sometimes a sense of helplessness where people think that the problem is too big to solve. And I think that's one of the really amazing things about local government is that we can make a change and we can make an impact here in our own backyard. And really, we're doing this for the children of our community, right? The kids who are, in grade school now and who are going to become the future leaders. We want to leave them legacy of a beautiful environment, the same beautiful city that we get to enjoy every day. I certainly want that to be available for my daughters and for the next generation.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilor West, do you have a follow-up?
I do. Do you see any need or instance where we would need to develop, like Charbonneau is, any further south of the river?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's something that the citizens need to decide, in terms of, for example, like the airport expansion, that's something that needs to go through a really dynamic and thorough process. It does affect, my in-laws live in Charbonneau. I have other friends who live there too. And I mean, we don't want to forget that part of the community because that does affect their daily life. So, I don't know that I have the answer to that, but I do know that the community as a whole has a really important role in making those types of very conscious, deliberate decisions.
Okay.
Anybody else?
What's you?
So there's one formal question left, which I will ask, and it's kind of wide open, so it gives you a chance to talk about multiple things if you would like to. Why are you the person that this council should appoint to this position?
Well, like I mentioned before, I've lived here basically my whole life. I went to Wilsonville Primary, Beckman Creek Elementary, Wood Middle School, and Wilsonville High School. So, I mean, it's basically a vote for our education system. No, I'm kidding about that. I married my high school sweetheart. We decided to move back here to raise our family because it's such a wonderful, cool place to live. I just love it here. I love seeing the changes that have been made and watching it develop over the past, 30 years. And I think that we have a pretty great opportunity to continue that and really build a legacy of a very dynamic, amazing city. I have 2 young daughters. They are going into 2nd grade and kindergarten. And it's kind of the right time in my life to do something like this. I've always had a full plate. I've always been active in terms of volunteer work and working on different boards and nonprofits. I work full-time, kind of double full-time. And I was in school last year for nutritional therapy, and the timing is just right. No more daycare. I have the energy, I have the excitement to bring to this council to join the 4 of you.
Okay. Anything else you would like to tell us?
I just want to, again, thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of the 4 of you, and for the opportunity just to voice my answers to your questions.
Well, thank you for being interested enough to put yourself out there on this not always comfortable kind of a process. So I appreciate the fact that you have done that. And I am aware of a lot of the work you've done in the community. So appreciate all the efforts that you have engaged in thus far. So
Yeah,
thanks very much.
thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Good evening, Mr. Ramadan.
Good evening, Mayor Tim.
We have, as you know, multiple interviews tonight. We're conducting them in kind of a formalized way. We have allocated up to 30 minutes for each candidate to speak. We have 6 individual questions that are standardized that we're asking all of our candidates to respond to. And I think there likely will be some time for you to add some additional comments or for us to divert from the formal questions if you would like to within that time frame. So the entire council is asking questions, and I would turn it over to Council President Ackerval to start.
Thank you.
First, I just wanted to say welcome and thank you for being here this evening. And thank you for your interest in serving on council.
Thank you for your kind words, and thanks for having me here, I think.
My first question is if you could describe a plan or a project or an initiative that the city and council is currently working on, give us a little detail, and then explain what you would bring to that work.
Well, I guess I'd go to Frog Pond development. I know the city's, at least the Urban Renewal Agency is working to put some infrastructure development in there. And it's a 500-acre parcel as I understand it. And I'm not sure exactly where it stands at this point, but I know that I'm really excited about Urban Renewal Agency work and urban renewal development and the attraction it has. Can't address the specifics because I don't know enough about the project, but I do know that housing, mixed-use housing and low-income housing definitely is something the city needs to place emphasis on. I think you all know that 9 out of 10 people who work in the city actually commute. And so if we get more housing for people to live here, that might mediate the traffic congestion and hearing about Wilsonville on the news every afternoon. Mm-hmm. Again, and I'll readily admit, I don't know a lot of the details of these projects. I do know that you guys are working on them. My intent would be to ask questions and learn, and then contribute where asked.
Thank you.
Mr. West?
Good evening.
Hi.
Hi there. Please tell us about a time when you had to collaborate with someone you strongly disagree with, and what was the result of that collaboration?
I was a chief financial officer for many, many years. And in that role, you tend to you don't see eye to eye, I would say, with marketing and business development people who seem to spend a lot of time and a lot of money on things that a conservative person like me wouldn't necessarily buy into. So I remember back in the day, there's a gentleman who was a real high-level marketing person that the firm hired. And his expense reports were as much as his monthly salary. And so we had some knockdown, drag out come to Jesus type conversations. And I think we both learned to respect each other. I mean, I think the best approach in that situation was me being bold enough to ask if all this stuff was absolutely necessary, and he was mature enough to know I wasn't picking on him. I was doing my job in protecting the assets of the company. So the bottom line is I confronted it. It took some time to work through it, but in the end, we became partners in crime, if you will.
Are you like kind of an iron sharpens iron type of relationship, differences, but?
No, I think that was my role in the company to protect company assets, chief financial officer type thing. It depends on the person. And I'll be, again, Ben, I'll be the first person to say I don't know it all. Mm-hmm. I try to literally listen and hear and express my feelings about things and hopefully come to a resolution. It's for the betterment of the whole. The company worked out better because we became an understanding partnership.
Thank you for the answer.
Sure.
Mr. Lehan.
Yes, probably you've thought about this question, but do you have any brilliant ideas that perhaps about what to do about traffic? Perhaps something the council has not yet thought of?
Well, I was pleased with the report I sat in on that that legislature is going the cost to complete I-5 Boones Bridge ramp-to-ramp auxiliary lane.
Right.
That, if you ask me what the biggest issue here specifically in Wilsonville is, at least in my opinion, it's traffic. And again, you can turn on the news every afternoon, almost without exception, and it's tied up going south at Boones Bridge. So I'm glad that the legislature and the state and ODOT is working on it, and the city council is paying attention to it. My question is, the fix that we're talking about, is that sufficient for the next 10 years or 20 years? I mean, those projects they're not done overnight. And so if we're thinking ahead, maybe we need another lane. I mean, I think the seismic improvements is terrific. It makes me feel good living in Charbonneau. But I don't know, an auxiliary lane, is that sufficient? On the other hand, it's better than nothing. And just like recently, I guess it was just in the last year, they added on the on-ramp going south on Wilsonville Road, the extra lane to get on the freeway. Right. Clearly that helped. But if we're going to have more housing and more light industry and more employers here, is that sufficient? So I don't have an answer for you, but it's a big thing on my mind.
Okay.
Sorry.
No magic bullet.
Yeah, right.
No magic bullet there. Okay.
You ask everybody for the secret magic bullet. Somebody's got it, put them on the council.
Councilor West.
Just a follow-up. Is there anything, because the I-5 is I-5 and the legislator, we got movement, we're all jazzed about that. Is there anything the city can do specifically not to make that problem worse? And are we doing anything to make that problem worse here in Wilsonville with what is in our jurisdiction?
Well, one thing I've observed or heard is to put a stoplight on coming from the Freddy's side of town, so that they stop before they actually get onto that 3-lane on-ramp going south. Because what happens is all these left turns coming from this side of town get backed up 3 or 4 or 5 signals because the other guys that are turning right just keep piling in. So it's almost like a log jam, traffic log jam type of a thing down there. And I'm sorry, Councilor Ben, but I mean, I'm just a resident here, so I'm just sharing an observation.
No, and it's a good one. Thank you.
Charlotte?
No, that was it. Now it's
No, it's
Councilor West.
That's my turn again.
I'm sorry.
It's me. So question 4 here, what philosophical approach has Wilsonville followed with regard to growth and development? And what would you advocate to continue or change?
Well, I think the philosophical approach is planning ahead. I think there's been a great effort to preserve the natural heritage and environment that we are blessed with here, the river and the trees and open space and that kind of stuff, parks and that. I'm a real strong advocate of continuing environmental awareness. I also come from a development background in the consulting engineering business where we put in subdivisions and so on and so forth. So I was probably much more pro-growth at that time than I am now. But I live in I call it the retreat in Charbonneau. And it's like an isolated village community. And I really, really love it over there. And on this side of town, it's more of a metropolis area, but I think the city's done a terrific job preserving the environment and taking care of its assets. The one thing I'd compliment the city on is that there is no such thing as deferred maintenance. If there's a maintenance schedule, if something's broken, the city gets on it. I'm not using the term we because I'm on the budget committee, but we don't let things pile up and become worse. We take care of our assets. Assets. And I think that's one of the reasons Wilsonville looks so attractive to new people moving in and so attractive to residents that live here and work here. It's really a beautiful town. Well taken care of. Landscaping's terrific, much better than Charbonneau.
Do you see any need or potential to develop at all ever south of the river in any capacity, like Charbonneau was developed?
I can't speak to that, Counselor. I'm not even sure. I don't know enough about it.
Okay.
Okay.
No? Councilor Leahan.
Yes, well, to the degree that you haven't already answered this question in the previous question, what are your feelings on environmental stewardship, farmland preservation around Wilsonville, and any other land use planning that affects our city? You covered a lot of that in the last
Covered a lot of it. The one thing I learned as I was preparing to visit with you tonight is that it's called brownfill.
Brownfields,
Yeah, that's a terrific term that stuck with me, and it's turning unusable land into something you could put light industrial site. I mean, it was my understanding. Again, I haven't spoken to anybody the way I understand it, and I think that's a terrific way to go about it. I think the preservation of our environment, specifically in Wilsonville, is huge for me. I mean, Tree City, USA, the Willamette River, it's just a beautiful town. And even where the wastewater treatment plant is, it's beautiful over there. It's just, oh my gosh, I was shocked that that's a park area. So I think, again, the city's done a terrific job, and I support that philosophy 100%. I wouldn't grow or put new housing in just for the sake of that. It would have to be a balanced approach, and I think that's what we've done so far.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we have just one more formal question left, and you're certainly welcome to expound on anything that you would like to beyond that. But the last question I would like to ask is, why are you the person this council should appoint?
I was hoping you'd ask that question. One, I'm committed to this community. I mean, I serve on the budget committee. I prepare as a volunteer tax returns for needy people in the community specifically. I attended the Citizens Academy. I'm enamored with everything I've seen here. I believe I can make a contribution. My experience and background, I think you have my profile and all that stuff, could be helpful. But more importantly, I'm at a place in life where I can commit the time and energy to be an active and productive member of the council. And I have to tell you the truth, I haven't been in this place before. You know, raising 3 daughters and working full-time is a big job. But at this point, I do have the time and energy to commit to the council to be productive and active. And finally, I am willing to learn. And I think Councilor Susie said it best. She said, and I'll try to quote, "I learn something every time I go to a council meeting." And she's been doing it for a lot longer than I have, obviously. But so I expect to learn a great deal. I've learned a tremendous amount in the Budget Committee. In addition, I think I have the experience to listen and hear various constituencies and opposing views before coming to an opinion or policy on anything that is before me. Is that enough? Should I keep going?
Give time. You have 14 minutes.
No, that's why I'm here, Mayor Tim. I think I can be of value to the city and to the city council.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Well, I think we're going to turn you loose then for tonight.
It's kind of short.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, no,
Could have been
that's
longer-winded.
That's fine. Being verbose is not always the best approach.
Well, thank you. One last thing.
Yeah.
I seriously have to thank you guys for this robust process you're going through to fill Susie Stevens' seat. It's much more robust than I expected. It's a lot more time consuming for you, each of you, than you probably anticipated. And so I have a great deal of respect for, one, what you do as counselors, but also for this particular process. It's really makes me feel good that people like you actually care so much about this city and where it's going. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for putting in your time and being willing to put yourself out for this. Very much appreciated. Okay.
Thank you.
We're just flying along, Mr. Cosgrove here.
I'll have a long city manager report for you.
You never.
What time could Mr. Badile be here?
He's at his son's gig. Yeah. He's at his son's gig.
We're only at 8:30 now. We may not,
Follow-up questions.
we may have to
Follow-up questions.
recess.
Yeah, recess or follow-up questions.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening and welcome. Thank you for coming in to talk with us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
I'm fighting a cold, I apologize, but we've got a format with allocated up to 30 minutes if you would like to use it. We have 6 specific questions that are kind of pre-scripted that all of the council will participate in asking, so that would give you 5 minutes a question if you use all that time. So far, people have kind of tended to move a little more quickly than that, and certainly can have time then toward the end if you have things that we haven't asked about that you would like to tell us or have us know, if that will work for you.
Very well.
So, Ms. Linville, Council President Ackerval will start off the questioning, if that's all right.
Very good.
First of all, welcome, and thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
And thank you for your interest in serving in this role.
Well, it's been I appreciate the opportunity, and I think the process has been very thorough, and I appreciate your deliberation. And so thank you for allowing me to be here.
My first question is if you could describe a plan, a project, an initiative, something that the city and council is currently working on. Give us a little detail, and then explain what you would bring to that work.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's an interesting question. So I think right now, although it's kind of a newer piece, I would select the Basalt Creek project and development that the council is now working on. I think I chose that for a couple of reasons. One is it's fairly new on the horizon. It's not in concrete yet, so to speak. But it brings, I think, to the city several opportunities. Certainly, expansion of its economic base is one of those. Employment, workforce development, jobs, the expansion of industry and opportunities in the city, in a place that I think has been well chosen. It's the infrastructure is available in a way that I think, although the cost is not, the cost is not, it won't be an expensive project. I think it allows the city to expand in a place where it doesn't have the impact on other infrastructure like I-5 that can't handle any further development in certain areas. I think it's, we've built roads, the city has built roads which will withstand the kinds of traffic that would be in and out of that area. So there has been some foresight in how that area can be developed. And I think it's just a great opportunity for expansion in that northwest side of the city and a partnership with Tualatin that I think is an important piece as well. What I can bring, I think, to that project is I think what my experience from the Development Review Board, although most of what we have done, in my experience in the years that I've served on the Development Review Board, primarily has been residential. We have done some industrial development as well, and so I'm familiar with that process. I know how it gets to the council when it gets to the council. I also have been active in my role in my college, the colleges, in working with developing business interests. Oftentimes when cities are seeking new business to move into an area, they're looking for educated workforce as well. And so doing that kind of visiting with new development opportunities, new industry, is something I'm very comfortable doing, and certainly would be willing as a council member, as it's appropriate, to assist with meeting with businesses and informally and looking at opportunities for selling Wilsonville, so to speak. And I have quite a bit of experience doing that, and think once a person is familiar with the resources that are available in a community and can communicate that to potential employers and businesses, then business development becomes a really, it becomes not, I won't say easier, but it becomes attractive to people moving into the community, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor West.
Thank you. My question for you is, please tell us about a time when you had to collaborate with someone you strongly disagreed with, and what was the result of your collaboration?
Well, I've had a number of opportunities to do that. Let me pick one that I can describe to you. When a person in my career sits in a cabinet with vice presidents that are your colleagues, but are representing different interests. So generally in the cabinet of the colleges that I have served in, there's a vice president of academic affairs, one of student affairs, a financial officer or chief financial officer, and then generally another one that may be around focused on technology or on workforce development. It's different in different settings. So all four of those people come to the table looking for resources. And what I learned really well in collaborating with my colleagues is that while we all want and need our individual priorities to be met, the organization moves forward in a more effective way when we listen and when we collaborate and we look for the opportunities to move the organization in the most positive way. So that might mean that in some of those situations, I might need to make my needs secondary to the needs of my other colleagues as we discuss those priorities, because we all can't have what we want all the time. So I'll give you just a real concrete example. I worked with a student, when I was an academic affairs vice president, I worked with a student services vice president who had a little bit more difficulty coming to the table with that kind of philosophy. So there wasn't anything that she wanted that wasn't a high priority. It needed to be first. Everything needed to be first. And so it took a lot of listening. It took a lot of respect. It took time. Unfortunately, that's what it takes, is time, probably more than anything, to allow her to feel heard, that we all understood what her issues and concerns were, and then we could all move on at that point. And so I think I've learned over time that people will be able to move on if they've had an opportunity to be heard. And so I think listening is one of the top priorities in facilitating that discussion, so people can feel like they've been heard, even if they don't get what they need.
Okay. I'm up next. And I'm going to ask if you have any brilliant kernels of ideas of what you might advocate doing about traffic, perhaps that we haven't thought of yet.
Well, outside of using my golf cart, I've wished numerous times that I could get my golf cart somehow to Fred Meyer from Charbonneau. I've wished there was a way to do that. I don't propose to have, I mean, there are much smarter people than I am that study traffic and understand traffic patterns and solutions to traffic far better than I do. I will say that I think the additional lane, which you've already thought of, which kind of goes down south along Canby and that Charbonneau exit is probably going to be helpful to a number of people. I don't think it's going to solve all the problems. I think the problems with I-5 and our traffic stem from arterials that are way to the north of us, that it's 205 and 217 that are really where the issues are that create the problems that we have. And I know that you, as well as I, have driven south from Portland and think we're doing just great until we get to that place where 217 comes into the freeway. So I think what other cities have done in terms of changes in work hours for employees, even our city employees, when they work 9 to 5 and they all dump out onto the road at 5 o'clock, there are solutions, at least for some of the employers, I think, in the city as well. Work weeks being a little bit different, those may have some differences too, as well. And I think with the resources that the city has for traffic management, solving the problems along Wilsonville Road where people get out onto the freeway during those peak hours will help, I think, the frustration, at least, of our own city folks who say there's a huge problem and they have to wait for 10 lights before they can get onto the freeway. So I think creative ways in terms of timing the lights and moving traffic in different ways so that we can keep them off Wilsonville Road as much as possible would be creative. I think we also need to continue, I think, to work on the state, with the state in terms of resources. I don't know that those are monumental brand new kernels, but outside of my golf cart.
Yeah, well, the golf cart, we might be one to take up some.
Well, and I think for at least the people that are south of the river, if there is a way for people to get from that area across I-5 and either over a pedestrian bridge with bicycles, with walking, or with golf carts to the Fred Meyer area, that shopping center, that would make a huge difference in the number of trips that are just simply made. I have to go to the store, I have to go to the store, I have to go to the store. And we have, we have a lot of people that are in that south area that travel back and forth. So while I laugh about the golf cart, I think it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Councilor West.
Your golf cart doesn't have an amphibious feature to it where it can just, I know. Someone should think of that. There you go.
Well, there are boats, there's a marina down there and there is a boat, but it's hard to get those boats to get up onto the road and,
I know.
it's It's either you can get in the water, but you can't get out,
I
or
know.
you can't get into the water, and
The struggle is real.
it is.
Okay, so my question for you is, what philosophical approach has Wilsonville followed with regard to growth and development, and what would you advocate to continue or change?
Well, I think one of the things that I think is important is managing density. And I think the city has done some really good things in managing housing density particularly. As I look at things from an outside perspective and not in terms of a larger plan, the variety of housing that has been made available to the citizens in Wilsonville, both moderate and low income, high density and lower density, higher income housing, the addition of Villebois as a fairly large, comprehensive, mixed-use housing area is really wonderful. I mean, with the area parks, the wetlands, the the multiple family housing, single family housing, connected homes, really a wonderful vision, I think, of how you can make a community be really attractive and effective, and yet still manage density. I think it's a very good example. I see development happening in the city of Wilsonville as purposeful in areas that are logical, and so, for instance, the now larger single-family homes that are being built in the Frog Pond area is expanding into a different market. And then I think there's an opportunity in the town center development to really do some exciting things with housing above retail space that could be a really wonderful mixture of low-income housing, multi-family housing with some really higher value homes as well. Certainly, I would advocate that be a mixed multi-modal housing development area rather than just a single. So I think Wilsonville has done a really very good job with that. I think also it's been purposeful in terms of growth and development and where it's going. And trying to make transit effective. So with SMART and now SMART going even farther south, I think that's been helpful as well. So I think that's really, those are really the areas that I think Wilsonville has done a fine job with.
Thank you.
Okay. I have the next to last question, and that is, talk to us a little bit about your feelings on environmental stewardship and farmland preservation, particularly south of Charbonneau, and just generally land use planning that affects our city.
Well, I think from my perspective, and I'm just going to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about what I see as a Charbonneau resident. Charbonneau is on the edge. It is the edge of the county, it's the edge of the city. So everything that happens to the south of Charbonneau affects all of Wilsonville and should, but intimately affects the people who live along that edge. So, and I think one of the beauties of the area that we live in is the urban reserve, the EFUs that we, I think, really need to protect. And there is a constant, as you know, there is a constant challenge to the use of the land south, particularly south of Charbonneau. I am not certain that development will never occur down there, but preservation of the farmland, the farm and food processors in that area. I think the city has done a really good job of helping to limit the growth in that area. I also feel that it's environmentally being a good steward of the lands that are south of that area in the as they currently exist. As it relates to environmental protection, I think the city has a major role and obligation to protect the environment, and I think that's land, water, air, and so that means water runoff. That is environmental waste. I think one of the really good examples is the green initiative that the council voted on recently in terms of the electrical contract with PGE, demonstrating to the community that the city is out there in front in environmental protection in any areas that we can impact. So I think it's also water in the Willamette River. It's the turbulence that, so some of those are a little bit peripheral to the city and the ability of the city to impact, but it affects our water supply and the integrity of our water treatment system, the turbidity of the water in the Willamette River. So I personally feel that those are important issues that need to be part of the decision-making as the council deliberates on development, industry, public works as well. So,
Thank you very much.
yeah.
Pardon me, I shouldn't be here today. Just one last formal question, and we've got 6 minutes on the clock still. I would like to ask you, why are you the person which this council should appoint to its vacancy?
Well, I don't know. No. I think at this point in my life, I bring to the council a different perspective than I probably would have 25 years ago. I have, and we all do, we have our life experiences that I think we bring to efforts that we participate in. I love this place. I'm delighted to be here. I can tell you that as a 6th grader living in Portland, I had an aunt and uncle that lived in Donald. And we would drive to my aunt and uncle's place nearly every weekend because I would work on the raspberry. They had a berry farm. My uncle grew Marion berries. And so we had to work on the berry picker machine as he was working on developing that. And so we drove down I-5 through Wilsonville and out onto the road to Donald. So I have seen this place when there wasn't much but the Burns truck stop here. And although I've not lived here the entire time, I have seen the city develop into a really wonderful place to live, and I experience that now. The diversity of the different areas that are living spaces, the level of services that are available in the city, the activities, as I was having a conversation with someone earlier, there is still the opportunity to make an impact in this place, where in a lot of larger communities, you can't do that. So I bring the caring for the community I live in to this place. I bring quite a bit of board experience. I have done board training as well. I have worked in state agencies for the majority of my career, and so I understand what it is like to work within the constraints of rules and laws. I understand the Open Meeting Act. I understand administrative rules. I understand quasi-judicial hearings. Those are kind of things that are in my back pocket that don't necessarily represent me, the person, but I do have that experience. I know that Susie Stevens was a well-respected member of this council, and her leaving leaves a hole which I would be honored to step into. So I have a desire. Community service has been a part of my life since my 20s, and to be able to, I feel a little bad if I would be appointed to the position that I'd leave a hole in the Development Review Board. I have enjoyed that opportunity to work with the planning staff and legal staff for the city. But I would really, I think I bring some unique experiences, and I think the opportunity that, as the role of the council has stated itself, is to identify needs and problems, and to look for opportunities for solutions. And I would like to be a part of that. So, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about my concerns about the airport if you have time, but I won't do that.
Well, we've used most of our scheduled time. So I think just the fact that you mentioned that, I don't know that we have time for any more questions.
Quick one.
You think you have
It's a quick one.
48-second
Yes,
question?
we'll keep it in 30 seconds. I just looking at your application, I noticed that you were an RN, and I'm always impressed when I see an RN that's getting civically involved. And I think we're advocates by nature. I'm also a registered nurse. Can you tell me how that plays in your role professionally?
Well, I not only had a wonderful education, I think nursing education prepares people for leadership in a variety. I think it's problem solving. It's a scientific method. And I think it brings, it builds communication skills, interpersonal skills. I would venture to say that it's one of the best educational backgrounds that a person can have that prepares them for life.
Well, thank you so much for your discussion.
Right on the nose.
And thank you for taking the time and effort to put yourself into this process and to come talk with us. Appreciate that very much. We are not going to deliberate tonight. That will be next meeting in 2 weeks.
Right.
And we have one more candidate who I don't know if he's here yet. Not yet?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. If, yes?
Good to go.
All right.
This is long.
What a trooper.
You get the gold star today.
1 year I was sick when I did my State of the City.
I think I remember that year.
I'm getting like right. I'm like,
Yeah.
Stand, be introduced.
Good evening, Mr. Badile. We are interviewing 5 candidates this evening, as I think you are aware, and we have allocated 30 minutes to each candidate, which is on the clock.
Alrighty.
And it will count down. We have prepared 6 kind of standard questions that we are going through with each candidate, and hopefully then we'll have a little bit of time to expound on some other things if you would like to, though we need to constrain the overall time to half an hour. So all of the counselors are prepared to ask a question or two, and I will ask Councilor President Ackerval to start off.
Hello. Thank you very much for being here this evening, and thank you for your interest in serving in this role.
Thank you for having me.
My first question is if you could describe a project or a plan or initiative that the city and council is currently working on. Give us a little bit of detail, and then explain what you would bring to that work.
So earlier in your interview, the mayor had asked me about Basalt Creek. I wasn't familiar with it, but I took the time to print out Wilsonville's version. I think it's July 11th, 2018. I also printed off Tualatin's version, their final version. That one's July 2nd, 2018. And then I went online and printed out everything I could find on the internet. Articles that related to it. It's grandiose. I mean, it's a big project undertaking, many facets, boundaries with Tualatin, industrial areas, residential, metros involved. You know, what I could skim off the top is, you know, everybody's concerned. The housing development, the noise, the industrial part, and you know, you got all these different facets and interlocking interests involved in this one little area. And granted, we had Charbonneau, we have Villebois, we have the current Frog Pond West, East and South. What I bring to the table for this is that I'm a good communicator. I would try to find out everybody involved, Metro, Tualatin's mayor and council member as well, businesses that are in the local area. I know there's a dump truck area out there. There's quite a few agriculture. There's some properties involved. Maybe stop by, talk to them, ask my sphere of influence and citizens here, and move on from there. What are their concerns? What have been our pitfalls and other projects going forward? What is Tualatin looking at? You know, being a good neighbor to them, and how we can come together for consensus and come to a good building as Basalt Creek goes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilor West.
I have a quick follow-up to that one. The light industrial that's going to go in there, can you speak to how that will be a little bit of a change or a benefit to Wilsonville in that as we grow in that direction?
Exactly. So the light industrial, if you look at Wilsonville, on that side you have, let's see, we got the not the dump, but the recycle center out there. We have some, Nike was out there. You start to go out there, you have the, like I said, the dump truck that's out there. It's basically light industrial. If you're going to build a city, to keep the sound away from residents, big dump trucks in the morning, garbage trucks, and so on and so forth. The concern I read about Tualatin is that they wanted to butt up to it with residential, and we want light industrial. Well, Tualatin's concern is smell. I'm in the construction industry. We start real early, 5, 6. If that's across the street from residential, even though if you've ever been to any city where the actual yellow line in the middle is a separation of cities, who's responsible, who's the police department, who's the fire department, those type of things. A benefit for Wilsonville is that we get to expand our growth, maybe bring businesses to our city, and offer up properties that would involve. Earlier, somebody was asking me, well, what kind of industries are you thinking? And I one that's true and dear to my heart, we don't have a flag making company on this side of the Colorado. And I was like, great, if Wilsonville had that, we could employ up to, I think they said 150 people. Truck drivers would take it up to 300. In a light industrial, very easy. Textile mills and so forth. I have no idea what's in store for our light industrial until we get to that part. There's a lot of hurdles to overcome, but I definitely like to see more businesses come to Wilsonville and for them to see us as business friendly as we are.
I have the next question, John. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Let's see here. Please tell us about a time when you had to collaborate with someone you strongly disagreed with, and what was the result of your collaboration?
Oh my gosh. I think all of us have had that. My last deployment, I ran an aerial port. And what that is that we load anything and everything onto an aircraft. And sometimes we work very closely with the Army, and I was a captain, which is an 04. Well, one of our housing elements, it was a big rush to involve soldiers into Afghanistan. We ran 4,000 soldiers along with our normal tempo. And one of the housing areas, all the soldiers wanted to keep their packs and their bags with them. I only had 2 opening doors, like you see there, to get in and out. And if you ever dealt with the Army, they don't care where they are. They would just sit down and sleep. And so 1, it was a fire hazard. 2, I can only have people in there because of air conditioning. And 3, they had to put gear guards outside. Well, I was chastised by 2 majors simultaneously asking me, what kind of show I ran, what was the hazards, how come they couldn't do X. And I had to tell them, I run the show here. You go from X, you check in, it's like an airport, you part with your luggage and you get onto the aircraft. And it was intense because 1, they outranked me. 2, but I had the upper hand because I just wanted to run a safe and efficient show. That month we ran 17,000 into Afghanistan and Syria. And my conversation with those 2 is that, I understand your want and need to be next to your equipment. And I understand the argument, but this is how you could help me run this efficiently. If they saw our staging area, granted, this is at 2:30 at night. So for them to see what I'm seeing during the day was sort of impossible. So I just basically walked them through the process, and I told them, I can't stay here and argue. I have other things to do. I could have the MPs escort them out. And so we basically came to a consensus that they were going to follow the flow, make things right, and we're in the flow with everything. And fortunately, their colonel arrived and asked me what was going on, why everybody was moving, why they weren't getting on board. And unbeknownst to the majors, they had to explain why they spent half an hour listening to me explain how the flow was. And that was pretty intense because, tempers are flaring. It's hot. It was 132. And so you can understand why somebody who wants to get things done and run their way, and we were just the Air Force, so, but it goes to how I can communicate with them about listening to them, showing them the way, going the way, knowing the way. And so getting them on board and seeing how the flow went on the reverse side, when they came back, they knew that if they had a problem, that they could come find me. Oh, where's that captain, the B guy, you know, since my last name is hard to pronounce, but we made everything flow for them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. I have a traffic question. What are some ideas you have to advocate for about traffic? Perhaps some things that the council and staff haven't thought up yet?
Is there a specific intersection or freeway or you're looking for?
Whatever you think is a priority.
Before I even ever came to think about running for city council, you know, you have these 4th of July neighborhood cul-de-sac parties, and we would always culminate and talk about, well, why can't we have another on-ramp over on Beckman Creek? And, you know, one of the gentlemen that was in the party, I to this day, I can't remember who it was, but he said that you can't have an on-off ramp that's closer than a mile to the next one. Metro won't go for it. You know, the city would like to have something of that sort, but, you know, they can only pitch something that's of great favor to the I-5 traffic to make sure flow goes well. So I dropped it. You know, I was like, well, it sounded good, you know, having a Beckman Creek on-ramp, off-ramp. And as I did more research, right when Bridgeport was going in and getting built, the on-off ramp from Bridgeport to Carmen Drive, it literally states Carmen Drive, 3/4 of a mile. And so, you know, arguing with the powers to be that the city of Wilsonville is grandiose to command an on-off ramp in less than a mile, would be the same arguments that the builders for Bridgeport and Carmen Drive had when they said, you know, we could use a specific lane for changing over. Granted, you know, just like anything, people who haven't been here before on off ramps of that sort in less than a mile, they'll signal to get off early, signal to get on, and we do have major trucks over there. And that can be a hindrance for us because, you know, trucks that stay in the slow lane will hinder people getting off and on. I get all that. But if you never ask the question, the answer is always no. You know, when you do ask the question, be surprised. You're like, you know, I thought the same thing. Let's see if we can spearhead this and get it moving. And that's one of the things I thought about just for Beckman Road. The other one is right next to Fred Meyer's. If you notice, there's only one lane to turn right. There's a bicycle lane, and the other lane has to turn forward. Many of the businesses there, back when Wildburger was there and some others, they were saying, why don't they make 2 lanes, one that's going to go onto the freeway and the other one that could absorb either a freeway off-ramp going north or going back to the other side of town. Granted, there's a danger because you have the bike lane right there, but I don't know all the answers. I've never done a study. I'm not a traffic expert. Again, going back to if you never ask the question, the answer is always no.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. West.
Congratulations on your son's receiving his Eagle Scout tonight.
Thank you.
I'm sure
I don't
you're
know
proud.
if anybody knows that I took the last spot because my son in the culmination just had his Eagle Border review and just accomplished it about half an hour ago.
Number 29.
Number 29 for me.
What philosophical approach has Wilsonville followed with regard to growth and development? And what would you advocate to continue or to change?
I think the only thing I could ask for change is that we learn from the previous, what we see long-term. Like for instance, my folks live in Charbonneau. One of the biggest projects they have there is the plumbing. And unbeknownst to my folks, they lived in a duplex, and the 2-story next to their 1-story, the sewer would back up into their shower because back then I don't know who was in charge, but they took the sewer and ran it to one conduit out to the street. And being that they were a two-story, sometimes it would back up into their shower. And the plumbing there is a big project that we're undertaking as a city. So that's one thing to learn. The second one is the folks that live at Villebois, you know, some of them like the back alleys. Some of them find it difficult to drive. I've had a number of, being that I deal with a lot of youth in my activities and volunteering, some of them have said that their sons or daughters had backed up out of the garage and hit the other garage, or trash cans, or a car that was waiting to go inside and get coffee of that nature. So as you progress along, you learn from things. Charbonneau is a good example because that one's a long extended one. We learned from that. Villebois, not to say that alleys are bad, but we could learn spacing and maybe radius of turns. We do have a lot of big vehicles here in Wilsonville. So as we go to like Basalt Creek, Frog Pond West, East and South, that we learn from those other things that have got us to this point to make us a great neighborhood. Cul-de-sacs are great, love them. But there's some cul-de-sacs in Wilsonville that look like they were a throughput at one point, or on the drawing plan to be a throughput. And so when you sell the house and the people that see it as a cul-de-sac and then see it as a throughput, it's like, well, that's not what I wanted. I wanted a cul-de-sac where I could be isolated and raise a family, have kids play basketball, the 4th of July parties I talked about. So moving forward, the one thing I would go forth in development is like find out what is your plans for these cul-de-sacs, even though it's next to a road? How is the plumbing? Is it up to code, current code? What are your thoughts for homes that are close? One of the meetings that I brought my scouts to, the biggest discussion was in River Green and Fox Chase, is that we built some elderly homes where it was the first part in Wilsonville where a door actually opened up to the side of a house. Very unique, but if you ever go over there, great people who live there, they have no problems with it. The people that are, the doors that face the house, the people that live there, no concerns. It was just one of those intricacies and odds that you find in Wilsonville that you don't know if other city council members have, or city development plans have run against. That's why, you know, just like Basalt, I don't want to be in just a bubble. I'd like to ask Tualatin, hey, have you ever ran into this? Or Sherwood, Canby, Aurora. Granted, they're rural, not as a growing fast pace that we are, but it's good to hear and bounce your ideas off of them.
Okay. And the last really question is, tell us a little bit about your thoughts on environmental stewardship and farmland preservation and land use planning generally that affects our city.
I'm glad you asked that question. Growing up, for a majority of my life, I thought I was going to be a marine biologist. I grew up in Monterey Bay. I was a tour guide for the Monterey Bay Aquarium. I love the ocean. I surfed until I was 6, loved sunrises, loved sunsets, been all over the world. The environment, I can't tell you a better calling to God than being out in the wilderness and camping, and I think that's what's helped me as a scoutmaster. Environmental stewardship, I wish we took better care of our forests. I wish we rotated our wood, our tree and forestation here. When growing up, one of the greatest things I always wanted to come to was Oregon because I love trees. I love Crater Lake. And when I got here and I found that the lumber industry was going down, that we were importing bamboo and other woods from Canada and so forth, I could not understand what was going on. Stewardship, I have a couple marine buddies that started a honeybee and masonry bee, and they've offered to bring me on as an employee, but there's no money in it. And going back to being a marine biologist, working with the marine oceanographers and the marine biologists at Monterey Bay Aquarium, they told me specifically there's no money in it. Half the time they're doing what their scientific research is, and even though they're trying to save as many kelp forests, which brings almost 60% of our oxygen to the earth, you have to really, really love it and live it and learn to live poor. So I always keep all those in mind. Agriculture you asked for. I grew up in a very small town called Watsonville, California. And everybody knows it, but don't think they do. Watsonville makes Martinelli's apple cider. So when I go all over the world and they have Martinelli's, it just brings me back to my high school days when I'd walk across the street and they'd give it to us for free. I grew up picking apples, strawberries, and know the hard work. So FFA, agriculture, it's in my blood. I would much rather live in the country than in a city, but I'm a slave to data. So I love Wi-Fi, I love my computer, I love getting to go shopping. I don't like to travel 70 miles to do that. Otherwise, I'd probably be in Alaska. So for stewardship, I always look to how can we be better stewards? How can we use our resources wisely, reuse, recycle, repurpose? In fact, I started a nonprofit specifically called Operation Spartan Flags, where we take barn wood and fence wood and repurpose it to make American flags for veterans with PTSD that have something useful to make. Granted, we'll make other stuff, Adirondack chairs, frames, benches, tables, but the main purpose is to see that something that was useful is useful again. Telling my veterans with PTSD that, look, your service to your country is great. I never want to take that away from them. But there's a second chapter. You have another use, and by my volunteer hours, I educated myself 3 classes into my PhD when I realized that my son needed a football and baseball coach more than he needed a doctor in the house. So I gave up being a business doctorate, and I've been a coach and a scoutmaster since 2006 to present. And so my stewardship goes to my kids. They know to respect nature. Today they help clean up Wood Middle School. So I would look for every and any way to protect our environment and move forward.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have one last formal question for you, sir. Would like to ask you why you are the person that this council should appoint to its vacancy.
So I've thought a lot about this, as you probably know. If you've ever read Sun Tzu's The Art of War, in his book, he talks to you about you can only know half the war. That's your half. There was 4 other genuine people that were in front of you before I came. And for one, there was 10 before. We dwindled them down to 5. For me, it's great to see that much involvement and that much courage to come forth and want to serve our city. And the reason why I say that is because I've been in positions where we look for coaches for football, or we look for parents to be involved in scouts. So when you look at our city council and there's that much involvement, business leaders, lawyers, retired attorneys, I think I saw a freelance writer. So then it gets to my 50%. Let's see, as you can tell, I really don't like talking about myself. And when I was nominated twice for Wilsonville First Citizen, it was humbling. This last time in 2018, when I was nominated again and then won First Citizen, I couldn't tell you how it overwhelmed me. You asked me why I think I'm probably a good candidate for is because like you read in my my application, I have a servant's heart through and through. There's nothing I won't give you, do for you, or there's nothing I won't do myself or ask anybody else to do without me doing it for Wilsonville. I ran a successful campaign. I love getting out to meet the citizens of Wilsonville. In this interview, you probably have 3 main questions. Can he do the job? The answer is yes. Will I do the job? The answer is yes. The last one is more important, is can I work with you? I can collaborate with each of you, Ben, Mayor, Kristen, Charlotte. We've worked together, although I was in the background working with Dawson's project. There are numerous things that I do in the background that I never want to be in the front, but the city is so strong, and I just retired from the military, that I find myself pacing the house of what can I do? How can I make things better? I work with each other, and on top of all of you, our other assets, a budget committee, the Parks and Recs, the library, which has a special place in my heart for reading, the development, the planning, Metro Committee. So I'm an action, impact, result type person. My actions impact Wilsonville should have some results. I never want to stand on my laurels for, one of the things you guys had me read was our goals. The goals are awesome. Every year they've changed. But for me, I want to look back and say, okay, how many did we check off? I'm one of those guys who likes to write a little box and check it off. And that's what I like to do. I like to be able to move forward. If you've looked at the back of my application, there's my last, what do you call it? I guess resume filler, but it's my last review as an officer. Each one of those highlights an action, impact, and result. I'm well-educated, well-versed. I love Wilsonville. And nobody has asked me to do this. Nobody has come and said, hey, you have to do this. I, by my own free will, I'm not trying to promote a business. I have no agenda. I just want to serve Wilsonville, all of Wilsonville. Charbonneau, Villebois, Arbor Crossing, the new facilities, the water treatment plant, the parks, all the citizens here, even the neighboring ones. I live in Arbor Crossing, which offers me a unique aspect. I'm on the cusp of where Wilsonville is building forward. I got a whole set of new neighbors that I get to meet. Going through Northwest Natural Street of Dreams, it gives me hope that Wilsonville, just like Charbonneau, might have a Charbonneau on this side. Granted, those homes are more expensive than I can afford, but still all the same, neighbors and friends. I'm a veteran, I'm world traveled, I'm a Pacific Islander. I live in a different area than most of the council, a different set of citizens that I can contact. I really focus on probably some of Wilsonville's most youth. I communicate well with just about anybody. There's probably not a topic I can't talk on. To that nature, the reason why I say that is because when you get people, who are butting heads, the one thing I try to do is find a common ground. And I think with all of us, the one thing that we have in common to start out from tonight forward is that we all want to see the best for Wilsonville. And that's exactly what's drawn me to, one, run for office, to apply for budget committee, and tonight, as you see, looking for the appointment to your new city councilor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. West, did you have a follow-up question?
I just want to acknowledge that, so everybody knows, that put into the record was Debbie Lau's letter of endorsement for you, and so we have that today. And in her letter, she makes a really clear statement that you're unique in a way as a candidate, is that you recently got over 4,000 votes for this position and nearly would be sitting on this diocese. I have a question for you, and I'm not sure what the answer to this is, but have you ever actually applied or been appointed to any boards or commissions for the city?
I applied to the budget committee, and going back to what I say, I can only know my part. One of the things that you saw on the back of this is some of the hard things that I've done. The budget committee is I was in charge of a squadron of 150 airmen, and that sounds grandiose, but in actuality, you start thinking numbers. I have to clothe these people. I have to house them. I have to train them. I have to transport them. So it was about a $1.3 million budget floating because it always had to be approved by Congress. So there were times where I had to tell my civilian staff that they were laid off for 2 weeks just so I could make other appointments. Very recently, I think I added this in here, it was an award that I received for, I had to negotiate a 2.3 billion with a B, not an M or a K, a B, the sale of Patriot missiles to the country United Arab Emirates. And it sounds easy if you just have point A to point B. Well, it's not so easy. Going back to dealing with the Army had the Patriot missiles. I had to intake them into Kuwait and explain to Kuwait, the Kuwaiti embassy, why I had so many missiles that were coming through their port, and then who was going to transport them to the country of United Arab Emirates. I had to gather all of them in a room. I had to drink tea with them 3 times before we even talked. So, you know, getting back to the budget, budgets are one of those things that everybody wants to hear the red ink and the black ink and where we're going to go to move forward. I don't know why I didn't make the budget committee. It was one of my favorite things. I'm a numbers guy. But again, it goes back to Sun Tzu. I don't know who was against me. I hope Wilsonville got a good player. But I'm still here tonight applying for this position. And I hope you all seek favor in that. Thank you, Councilor West.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your effort and your time in putting yourself forward on this. We're not going to deliberate tonight. That'll come in 2 weeks. So we have basically completed the interview process. And unless council feels like there's anything additional you want to do tonight, Mr. Cosgrove, anything that we should?
I think you've laid out the process, so.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, sir, very much. And thank you
Mayor.
for your service to all of us. And I will declare us adjourned at 9:27. No?
Well, I was just going to give you just 2 quick updates.
So I can
City manager's
reconvene?
business, yeah, just be real quick.
Reconvene at 9:27?
You don't need to reconvene. I just have someone I want to hand out, and you can
Okay.
look at it. We're going to do some reformatting of the Citizens Academy.
Okay.
Just to shorten the timeline a little bit, and I just want to tell you that, thank Councilor Akkerval for showing up to the community block party, and we had over 2,000 people show up to that event, so it was very successful.
Awesome.
And
Was it fun?
Yeah, it was a good event.
It was a good event?
Yes,
Yes,
Susan,
she
Susie
did.
Stevens, she did the duck races for us.
Okay.
These are actually.
Feel better, Mayor.
Oh, so do I.
Sorry.